What if I told you that silence, true unwavering silence, isn't just a response, but a mirror that reveals her deepest regrets? When you walk away and say nothing, it leaves space, not just for her to think, but to feel. And in that silence, she's no longer in control. She starts remembering, doubting, wondering if she ever really understood your worth. This isn't about playing games. It's not about ghosting or manipulation. It's about reclaiming your power. Every day you choose calm over chaos, detachment over reaction. You're not just healing, you're forcing her to face the one thing she never expected, your absence. Silence isn't weakness, it's dominance. And right now, you're at a crossroads. You can break the silence and give her back control, or you can hold your ground and let the silence work in your favor. If you're ready to turn distance into strength, hit the like button, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment below. I lead with silence, not desperation. Let's begin. Number 1. The power of saying nothing. You think silence is weak, that by staying quiet you're losing ground, that if you don't explain yourself, don't fight back, don't reach out, you've surrendered. But that's not the truth, not even close. Real silence, the kind that comes from clarity, from restraint, from knowing exactly who you are, is warless power. It's the kind of power that doesn't flinch when provoked, doesn't need applause to feel secure, and doesn't move unless there's meaning behind it. Right now you feel the weight of what you're not saying. You feel the tension building in your chest, the urge to speak, to explain, to be understood. But she's not listening, not really. Her distance has already told you everything her words won't, and chasing clarity from someone who thrives in ambiguity will only weaken your voice. You want to prove your side, you want to defend your worth. But understand this, when you choose silence not from cowardice but from composure, you disrupt the game. You break her expectations. She thought you'd beg. She thought you'd spiral. She thought she'd have the final word. Instead, you give her something she didn't prepare for. Your absence. Think of silence like cutting a signal. You've been her emotional Wi-Fi, always connected, always responding, always available. But the moment you go dark, the moment she can't sense your energy anymore, she notices. Not because she suddenly understands your value, but because she can no longer use it. And in that void, discomfort grows, questions surface, control dissolves. This is where your power begins, not in the noise, but in the gap you leave behind. Your stillness becomes a mirror. It forces her to confront herself without your presence buffering the truth. She expected noise, but what she got was reflection. She expected chaos, but what she found was calm, and that calm, that unnerving quiet, it shakes more than 1,000 words ever could. You're not retreating, you're choosing peace over performance. You're not giving up, you're rising without permission. And in a world where everyone's shouting to be seen, the man who speaks with silence becomes unforgettable. So don't break the silence to remind her what she lost. Stay silent long enough for her to feel it. If this is the strength you've been waiting to claim, then drop your voice in the comments. I don't speak to be heard, I choose silence to be remembered. Number 2, their silence doesn't mean you were never loved. You've been staring at the silence like it's a verdict. The lack of a text, the absence of a call, no explanation, no closure, just the dull ache of being left in the dark. And slowly that silence starts whispering lies. That you never mattered, that they've moved on completely, that it was all one-sided. But silence is not always indifferent. We are conditioned to believe that care is always loud, that love must announce itself in grand gestures or comforting words. But the Stoics remind us, don't be disturbed by the things you see. Instead, question the judgments you place upon them. Just because someone doesn't reach out doesn't mean they've forgotten. It doesn't mean they don't feel. Often it means they're battling something within themselves, guilt, shame, or a fear of rejection they'd rather avoid than confront. And you? You've been waiting. interpreting, internalizing, making their absence mean something about you. But the real danger isn't their silence. It's the story you attach to it. Because once you make their quiet mean you're unworthy, you give them power they never ask for. You allow them to dictate your value through avoidance. And that is a game you will always lose. This is where Stoicism becomes your armor. It teaches you to separate what you control from what you don't. You don't control their healing. You don't control their thoughts. You don't even control their need to communicate. But you do control how long you let their silence weigh on your spirit. And you do control what you build with the space they left behind. Let this be your moment of release, not from love, but from illusion. If they're silent, let them be. If they're distant, let them stay. You don't need noise to heal, you need truth. And the truth is, their silence isn't your shame to carry. It's their journey to walk. Meanwhile, your journey is calling, and it's built not on responses, but on resolve. Stop making their absence louder than your purpose. You are not defined by what they couldn't say. You are defined by what you choose to do when they say nothing at all. If you're ready to unchain yourself from what was never yours to fix, speak quietly but firmly. Their silence is not my story. I rise without permission. Number 3. The weight of your absence speaks louder than words. They won't say it out loud, not at first, maybe not ever, but they feel it. That quiet space where your energy used to be, the attention, the check-ins, the support. You used to fill the room without effort, make their life easier without them even noticing, and now that space is just empty. The silence you left behind doesn't echo, it presses, heavy, real. You thought they didn't care, that your presence was disposable, but the truth is, people often don't recognize the value of consistent energy until it's gone. When you were there, giving, listening, showing up, they took it for granted, not out of malice, but out of comfort. You were the one carrying emotional weight without asking for credit. You gave without announcing it, and because of that they forgot it had a cost. But now they carry it alone. They wake up and don't find your messages. They scroll and don't see your reactions. The emotional cushion they unknowingly relied on is missing. At first, they pretend not to notice. They act unaffected, but as the days stretch on, the void grows louder. Not in noise, but in contrast. You're not around to absorb their chaos, to anchor their mood, to mirror their importance. This is where the shift begins, not in confrontation, but in absence. You've removed something real from their world, and while they might not show regret in public, they feel it privately. Because energy doesn't disappear without consequence. It lingers in memory, in routine, in the strange discomfort of no longer being seen the way they once were. The Stoics never taught us to chase recognition. They taught us to become undeniable, even in silence. Your presence was a gift. Your absence is a lesson. One they didn't know they were signing up for, but one they will carry, whether they acknowledge it or not. And you don't need to remind them. You don't need to announce your departure. The weight of your energy, when removed, does the talking for you. So stay still, stay strong, let them sit with the emptiness you used to ease. Because in that stillness, you're not just protecting your peace, you're finally being heard. If you've stopped explaining and started becoming the lesson, leave your mark below. I no longer show up where I'm unseen. My silence teaches louder than my words. Number 4, your silence becomes the mirror they can't escape. There comes a point when words no longer serve, when explanations become noise and defending your value feels like screaming into a void. That's when silence becomes your sharpest tool. Not a weapon, but a mirror. One they can't avoid, one they can't argue with. Because in the stillness of your absence, they finally see themselves without your light softening the edges. When you were there, responsive, attentive, always ready to understand, you were a buffer between them and their own reflection. Your presence distracted them from their own behaviors. Your compassion gave them excuses. But now, the silence you've chosen is surgical. It slices through their distractions, offering no interference, no comfort, no place to hide. And in that quiet, the truth echoes. They remember what they said, what they didn't say, the things they avoided confronting when your voice was still in the room. Now, every silence becomes a rewind button. Every quiet night replays your calmness, your effort, your disappearing patience. You didn't throw blame, you didn't scream, you just stepped back. And in doing so, you left behind the one thing no one can ignore: space to think. That's what Stoicism gives you, the ability to step away without collapsing, to detach without bitterness. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Don't waste time arguing what a good man should be one." You're not here to prove what they lost. You're here to embody it. And that embodiment is far more haunting than anything you could say. So while they try to fill the silence with distractions, a part of their mind always circles back to the stillness you created, back to the moments you didn't reply, back to the version of themselves they became in your presence, and the version they're now left alone with. It's easy to ignore noise. It's much harder to ignore reflection. And your silence, if rooted in self-respect, becomes just that, a clean, unfiltered reflection of their choices, their losses, their words left unsaid. They may never admit it, but they will feel it, deeply, quietly, repeat. If you've stopped speaking so they can finally hear themselves, share this, quietly but clearly. My silence is the mirror. I stepped back so truth could speak. Number 5. Silence shatters the illusion that they won. In the beginning, they felt victorious. They walked away with confidence, maybe even pride, convinced they had the upper hand, convinced that your silence was weakness, that your refusal to chase was surrender, that you didn't respond because you had nothing left to say. But that illusion doesn't last, because silence, true silence, carries weight, and over time, it does what noise never could. It reveals who really lost. They expected a reaction. That's how it usually goes, right? Anger, desperation, a flood of messages begging for answers, but you gave them none of it. You didn't validate their decision. You didn't hand them control. You simply disappeared with composure. And that quiet composure begins to echo. At first it feels like space, then like uncertainty, then finally like consequence. Your silence unsettles them, not because you vanished, but because you didn't collapse. Because you didn't prove their narrative that you were dependent, fragile, or waiting. And that's when the illusion breaks. Suddenly their imagined triumph starts to feel hollow. What once felt like power now feels like absence. This is where Stoicism becomes more than theory. It becomes presence, the kind of presence that doesn't chase validation, because it's anchored in truth. You understood something they didn't, that true strength is calm, not chaotic, that the one who can walk away without burning bridges is always in control. And your silence? It wasn't retreat, it was clarity. They thought they left you behind, but they can't stop circling back, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't. Your dignity disrupted their ego. Your stillness rewrote the ending they were sure they'd authored, and that contradiction eats at them. Quietly, persistently. It's not about revenge. You're not trying to punish them, you've simply chosen peace. And in doing so, you've revealed the cost of their decision. Because losing someone who knows how to stay silent, who doesn't need drama to prove their worth, is the kind of loss that lingers. If you've stopped proving and started living, then let this truth stand without noise. I didn't lose. I just left the game they needed me to play. Number 6. Silence turns you into a mystery they can't unravel. There's something about silence that unsettles people. Not the absence of words, but the absence of access. You used to be predictable, open, easy to read. They knew where your heart was even when they mishandled it. They could sense your presence in a glance, in a post, in a reply just fast enough to remind them they still had you. But then you went quiet. And now they can't tell what you're thinking, or worse, what you're becoming. At first they told themselves they didn't care, that you were just being dramatic, that your absence wouldn't last. But deep down, curiosity began to pull at them. Who are you without them? Are you still watching? Are you better or bitter? Is your silence proof you're hurting or healing? These are the questions they didn't expect to ask, yet they ask them anyway, quietly. Because mystery is magnetic, and your silence, when rooted in growth rather than guilt, makes you exactly that. A question mark wrapped in strength. A chapter they thought they finished, now missing the last page. You stopped being a story they could control the ending to. You became a presence they can no longer predict. The Stoic doesn't seek attention. He draws it by standing still while the world flails for answers. You don't need to announce your progress. You don't need to showcase your transformation. Your silence speaks in subtler, sharper ways. The way you don't check in. The way you show no reaction. The way you move forward with quiet confidence, not spite. And this calm refusal to explain yourself becomes unbearable to those who once counted on your availability. They'll start checking, through mutual friends, through anonymous views, through silent scrolls on your feed, not because they miss the past, but because they can no longer decode the present. You've become untouchable, not through distance, but through evolution. And that is a kind of power they never saw coming. Let them wonder. Let them sit with the uncertainty they never gave you space to feel. You're no longer a character in their story. You've become a world they no longer have a map for. If you've turned your silence into the question they can't answer, let it be known. I don't chase attention. I become the mystery that draws it. Number 7. Silence isn't revenge. It's choosing inner peace over chaos. They'll say you're cold, that you're being manipulative, that your silence is meant to punish them, but they're missing the point entirely. You're not trying to hurt anyone. You're just done bleeding for people who keep handing you the knife. This silence, it's not an act of war, it's an act of liberation. A conscious choice to step away from confusion, mixed signals, emotional loops that lead nowhere. You've chosen stillness not to provoke, but to protect. In the past, you would have responded. You would have fought for clarity, demanded truth, begged for closure. But now you see the truth for what it is. If peace requires you to explain yourself to someone who never really listened, it's not peace, it's performance. Stoicism teaches us to withdraw, not in bitterness, but in strength. To step out of the storm not because we're weak, but because we value the sun too much to stay drowning. This is your boundary, not a wall built from spite, but a fence lined with self-respect. They offered you ambiguity, and you returned silence. They played with distance, and you responded with detachment. Not because you didn't care, but because you finally do. For yourself, for your energy, for your sanity. Your silence isn't punishment. It's the end of negotiation. The moment you stopped explaining yourself to someone who treated your emotions like noise, it's not about teaching them a lesson, it's about no longer enrolling yourself in theirs. And that distinction makes all the difference. Because here's what happens when you no longer react. You return to yourself. You get your mornings back, your sleep back, your inner clarity back. And slowly, the chaos that once defined your connection fades into irrelevance. What once felt like loss now feels like weight lifted, not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer controls you. They'll eventually realize you weren't trying to win, you weren't trying to prove anything, You were just tired of bleeding for someone who called it drama every time you spoke up. And your silence? It's not cold. It's clean. If you've stopped fighting for the chance to be misunderstood, let it be known with clarity, not volume. This silence isn't revenge. It's peace I refuse to postpone. Number 8. Stoic love doesn't chase chaos. It commands respect in stillness. You've probably been told that love is loud, that it fights, cries, begs, breaks, that real connection is measured in how much noise you make when it's slipping through your fingers. But that version of love? It's unstable, reactive, built on the highs and lows of emotional dependence. Stoic love doesn't operate in that frequency. It doesn't perform for attention. It doesn't chase to prove worth. It simply stands calm, clear, and immovable in the face of uncertainty. You're not hard to love. You're hard to reach without integrity. That's the difference. You don't play emotional hide-and-seek. You're visible to those who see value in stability, honesty, depth. But to those addicted to drama, to the thrill of being chased, your stillness feels like distance. Your composure feels like rejection, and your silence, it unnerves them, because it refuses to feed the chaos they mistake for connection. She expected you to prove something, to collapse, to spin in the orbit of her detachment, but you didn't. You walked away without explanation, not because you didn't care, but because you realize caring isn't meant to be screamed, it's meant to be honored. And if someone cannot meet your love with presence, then they don't deserve your energy in fragments. This isn't pride, it's clarity. When you choose not to run after someone who weaponizes your affection, you're not being cold, you're returning to center. You've traded validation for sovereignty. You've chosen a kind of love that doesn't cost your peace, that doesn't bend to moods or fear rejection into submission. Stoic love says, I will be here fully until I no longer am, and if my absence means nothing to you, then neither did my presence. And that changes everything. You stop proving, you start living. You stop chasing, you start building. And slowly the pain becomes precision. You no longer confuse attention with affection. You no longer need their response to feel whole. They'll notice, not because you're trying to be noticed, but because men who love with quiet conviction are rare, and in a world of noise, your silence becomes unforgettable. If you've stopped chasing love that demands chaos, and started embodying love that offers peace, let it echo here. I don't love loudly to be heard. I love quietly to be respected. You started in pain, in confusion, thinking silence was just a defense, but now you understand it's your sword and your shield, not running away but standing tall in restraint. She didn't expect you to stay quiet this long. She thought you'd chase, explain, plead, but instead you evolved. You became untouchable. Your value was never something she could take. It was always yours to reclaim. If you're ready to keep rising in silence and strength, like this video, subscribe and comment. I am unshakable. Hold the line, stay silent, and let the world echo with your absence.